Hi, this is What's Good About Local Food, featuring Local Food Forum and What's Good. I'm Bob Benenson from Local Food Forum.
And I'm Matt Tour from What's Good.
Yeah, so we learned a few lessons from our first thing, which is like try not to let it run on for 47 minutes. So this will be a little bit shorter. And we are going to hit some of our topical issues. But the first thing, and I might pop up a slideshow if it decides to work at the end, but we're ramping up, meaning that ramps, the first crop that usually shows up at the farmer's market, are now in season. And my friends at Ellis Family Farm from Benton Harbor, Michigan, have announced that they will have some at Green City Market tomorrow. So I'm going to get there very, very early. So I make sure I get mine before the crowd descends for the first plant. Now, Matt, you and I were just discussing before we opened this that ramps are actually the plant for which Chicago is named. The history that we learn here in Chicago, at least, is that the American Indian tribes here in Chicago had a profusion of these wild onions. This is back when this area was mostly swampy, and their word for wild onion was something, I hope I pronounced it right, but something like Chicago, and that became Chicago. And Chicago translated to wild onion. You see wild onion a lot in here in Chicago, but my favorite interpretation is stinky onion. So I love Chicago. This is my home, but I kind of like living in a place that was named after a stinky onion.
That's cool. That's super cool. I know that the thing I had learned about ramps that was really interesting was that it was during early settling times in the Northeast and New England areas, 1500s, 1600s, it was the first vegetable that they would get, and they hadn't eaten vegetables in months because they didn't have a way of, holding anything, or, I mean, they weren't even cultivating anything really at that time. So
Yeah, and
pretty interesting.
and so I'm going to ask Chef Matt, because in case you don't know, Matt is a culinary school trained, experienced in the kitchen chef. What's your favorite way to use rams?
Oh, on the grill with steak. I mean, I love that combo. Just a little bit of olive oil, and on the grill, get them nice and a little charry on the edges, and then just go on top of a steak with it. It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, and just to explain for people who aren't familiar with ramps, they're an allium. They are a wild onion, and they have a much smaller bulb, the white part at the bottom. It's just it's thin and slender, and glorious big leaves, which most
Yeah,
onion varieties don't have.
right. I think they're technically I've heard them called wild leeks,
Yeah,
because I guess the leaves, being a big factor there.
yeah. And as a qualified maniacal home cook, I like to put them in frittatas or in scrambled eggs. And also this year, I'm probably going to try and pickle some. They lend themselves to pickling, and it's such a short season. And then, come around July, I can say, ha ha, I've got ramps and you don't.
Yeah, pickled ramps are fantastic. They're
Yeah,
they're super good.
yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the other things, I saw at Green City Market last Saturday, which is still the only area market that's open. Um, the indoor crops, and we've been talking about this a lot. The more and more farmers are building hoop houses or other indoor growing facilities. So we're starting to see lots of varieties of radishes that are started or grown indoors. Spinach,
Yeah.
winter and early spring spinach is the best,
Yes.
because that cold, warm cycle really makes it very sweet. And my friend Tracy Bell at Three Sisters Garden in Kankakee tomorrow, who does only home delivery now, used to be at Green City for many years, is going to be delivering me my first green garlic of the year and my first garlic chives of the year. So It's so much fun because every week through the rest of the season there'll be something old and something new. We'll get into that transitional season where the crops that came out earlier are starting to peter out, but something else wonderful is coming online. So
Yes, yeah, it's an exciting time of year.
it
Baseball,
yeah,
Rams,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
snow.
still waiting for the first asparagus because when the market's always open in May, I would always say that, and I'm a big baseball fan, but I say it's not baseball that signifies spring. It's when I get my first asparagus from Big Klug Farm in St. Joseph, Michigan. So I keep your fingers crossed that maybe something will pop up tomorrow, but it's early by next week.
Yeah, we're hearing it's coming. Asparagus, and we'll have at Farm Shop. We'll have asparagus and ramps within about the next week. So they're
Yeah,
starting to show up. I mean, the hoop houses and the for people who don't know what they are. I mean, they're basically like long tunnels. That are constructed of a metal frame typically, and then a poly plastic kind of wrap, and that gives a lot of thermal energy to the crops that are being grown in there and protects them from the outside environment, frost, cold. So it really, what they do is it can extend and or give the grower, depending on where they are, 20 20 extra weeks of growing time, or even more than that. And really cool to see. I think it's probably like, for just how do we see local food grow and become more of an available thing for more people. I think it's a good example of one thing that if you were to say, hey, I've got a $10,000 for every farmer in America, what would I spend it on? It would be that.
yeah,
It gives them a lot more capability to grow and produce food all year.
yeah. And that's actually how the Frontera Farmer Foundation that was founded by Chef Rick Bayless got started. When he opened the restaurant in the late 80s, and he just come from a long period of time living in rural Mexico and learning the regional food cultures, and realized that local food was what gave local cuisine its identity. Then he came to Chicago, and it had gone all over to the conventional food system, and it was really hard for him to find farmers who were selling to chefs. So he
Hmm.
found a few, and then he bought their stuff, and they said, I'd like to buy more of your stuff. And they say, I can't afford to build a hoop house. So he lend the money to build a hoop house, payable in product. And that eventually evolved into the Frontera Farmer Foundation, which since 2003 has now given more than $3 million in like $10,000 increments to hundreds of farmers in the
Yeah, which
region.
is
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I guess you kind of look at it. There are people out there and grant foundations and some philanthropic stuff that I've seen where it works really well, and I think it's just yeah. On the other hand, it's an unfortunate reality to the lack of support our government really aligns
Oh,
with farmers who grow food. It's all subsidies, and all these things are all set aside. People might think who don't know about really about local food and local food producers. They might think that well, the government subsidizes farmers all the time. Like, it's not food,
not our
it's all
farmers.
commodities. And the corn, wheat, and soy is not food for us. So
Mhm.
I think that that's a big thing that really needs to change if we want to see things grow, and we want to I guess deal with whatever problems come our way, beyond the pandemic and or whatever comes next. It's important that we have a resilient food supply, and I think the hoop houses, there's a few different things. Maybe we could talk a little bit about those. You have a greenhouse, and the difference between a greenhouse and a hoop house is simply that one is heated,
Mhm.
heated through wood, coal, or some other method.
Mhm.
I've seen solar steam boilers and a few other things that are really new types of technology
Yeah,
that
yeah.
can
Even geothermal. I've seen a few of those.
Yeah, geothermal. I mean, there's. I saw in Maine there was a farmer who had he had an electric boiler that was run off of a few different kind of green sources. He had a wind turbine. He had a solar panel. It was pretty neat to
Yeah.
see. And he had built this himself, and so I think seeing what is happening with farmers, and you get these people who are coming out of engineering, or financial world, and they start putting their ideas and innovations into how things have been done for so long. It starts to change and evolve, and that's really a good thing. So you have greenhouse that's heated. Hoop house is an unheated,
Hmm.
something most people would probably walk up to and say, "Oh, a greenhouse."
Right.
That's a hoop house, and then you have high tunnels and low tunnels,
Hmm.
which are more usually it's a cloth based kind of or fabric that
Hmm.
they string over the plants,
Right.
and they use a little kind of wire hoop that covers the row. And then you've got all kinds of different versions of these things in between, but all of these things help to grow food during I would say naturally abnormal times.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be a great segue to a topic that we've been wanting to talk about, which is how the paradigm of conventional versus organic or sustainable or good food, as we like to call it, is changing. And it's changed dramatically over the last 2 years and it's continuing to change. The first wave was right after the pandemic started. And this is where I started buying from What's Good because there you were working with Green City Market then, and the markets were closed. We didn't know if they would reopen that year, and but more importantly for most consumers, the people with limited economic means always have food security issues. But for the vast majority of Americans, for generations, all you needed to do is walk down to a grocery store and you could get everything you want. It was just there. The great American industrial food machine worked almost flawlessly. There were never, except during World War II when there was rationing, there were never food shortages. And then all of a sudden, you couldn't get in a grocery store. The grocery stores had empty shelves. You couldn't get it for the first few weeks, even months of COVID. You had to, wait like 2 weeks to get a delivery. There was such a long waiting list. And so a lot of people gravitated to local food, either back to local food or
Mm,
doing it for the first time. And so
mm,
they're buying from direct from farmers. They're buying direct from farmers through What's Good. And then when
mm.
the farmers markets opened, they flock to farmers markets
Yeah.
and CSAs because they're a reliable source of food. So let's talk about that part, and then we'll talk about inflation and how that's impacting people.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things. Kind of just my local food geek in me is, really interested in the historical kind
Hmm.
of evolution of food. I mean, and as crazy as that sounds, it really has an amazing history in line, or maybe we have created this history of food, right? Where you know most animals just they eat certain foods, but humans have this interesting kind of story to it in that we have food has evolved along with us. And when we look at what farming is, and the idea of growing your own food, controlling, in a way, controlling nature to a point, right? Where, like we're talking about, where that high tunnel now takes that another step, right? Frost can't get me now. I can protect my crops from frost. That's crazy. That's amazing.
Yep.
But when we look at how food has evolved, and you have, the idea that we all used to have to go find it and cultivate it ourselves, right? And then, civilization and society evolved to the point where I might grow food so you don't have to. And Bob can become a, awesome writer or author and do his thing and, teach people about other things, right? So I'm growing food for the sake that you could do something else for our society. And you kind of move then into early United States history and the early settlers out in New England and or in Florida that are kind of like dealing with something new for the first time, winter and lack of supply. If you went
Right.
back to Europe, you had, these places where food was gathered. Farmers
Mhm.
markets, open air markets were a thing in Europe, but the settlers get here and there's nothing, right? It's like us
Mhm.
during the pandemic. Like, what are we going to do? So they brought supplies with them. When they ran out, they all died for the most part. The Indians and or the Native Americans came in and helped early settlers survive, and we know that story. And I think what we should learn from the early parts of food and food evolution to what we saw in 2020, and what we'll see moving forward, is that our the traditional food supply, or the food supply that we learned to rely on, is a bad way of thinking about things.
Right.
I guess we're coming up on Easter. Put all your eggs in one basket type thing, where it just doesn't give you any option when things go wrong. And I guess my understanding of what local food ecosystems offer to us as a society moving forward is really mostly in resiliency. It doesn't necessarily eliminate the possibility of, we work with farmers in New Orleans where they're getting wiped out by a hurricane for the season, right? There's no greenhouse or hoop house that's going to protect those crops. It's done for them. Well, what happens to New Orleans if they rely on local food? What happens? Well, the point is that you have other areas of the country that can help to feed those people, and that's what our society needs to do. It's what we've been doing forever. And local food really is about having that option so that all of our food doesn't come from somewhere in the world. And if that goes wrong, we're screwed, which is what we saw. I mean, if people want to know, well, what happened? Why did we, why was meat, not available in the grocery store, or this? When you look at where our most of our food is coming from, it's coming from very singular channels,
Right.
from very far away. And so you have a series of things that can occur which cause that to be disrupted. The more you have, you sprinkle in a variety of local producers in a given area, the more you have resiliency in that, right? If Ellis family has a problem on their farm and there's a tornado that touches down and wipes their farm out from production, and knock on wood that doesn't happen. And then Nichols is there, or McClug is there,
Right.
or Flatwater is there. You have these different farms. That's in itself the idea of what localizing our food system really really means.
Yeah, and that's what we learned, unfortunately, the hard way a couple of years ago. Is that, I mean, why exactly did were the farmers markets just flush with food when you had empty shelves? And two
Well, I mean,
reasons.
look at
Yeah,
we didn't have
short supply lines and direct to consumer.
right. Well, I mean, look at though farmers markets didn't happen. I mean, they were shut down. The city of Chicago deemed farmers markets non-essential, and so they weren't even allowed to happen. The
Mhm.
farmers had food. I mean, that was the thing. Is I think you start thinking about, like, it's farmers having food, producing food, and the resiliency of production, and then you have how people get it,
Right.
and the resiliency of how people can get it is another factor, that I think is also something that we had to learn. But here's the thing: I would say, based on I watch data across dozens of markets in the United States
Right.
daily, and what I would say is, if you look at how the demand for local food occurred throughout 2020, it looks like that kind of hockey stick, as they say. It just went up, shot
Mhm.
up unbelievably extraordinarily.
Right.
Then it started to slowly come down, and it's slowly gone down to the point where the overall demand for local food is about 12 times greater than it was prior to the pandemic.
Right.
However, that's a significant reduction from where it was during the height of the pandemic. And when we poll or survey consumers that are out there who have not continued buying from local producers, what's interesting about it is it's like amnesia. Yeah,
Yeah.
forgetfulness of what's happened. And I think, you know, I don't think our problems have ended. I don't think that, this is the last pandemic we will deal with, unfortunately. I don't think it's the last, major natural disaster that we'll deal with. And I definitely don't think that we're, going to rely on lab grown food, or hopefully we won't be relying on lab grown food for our future. So it's, you know, it's a problem. It's not, that we haven't learned something. I think most, you and I knew something before the pandemic. Really talking to people who didn't, and who are now back to shopping at Walmart or wherever. I think that's a big thing that we need to change.
Yeah, absolutely. But now those people who are shopping at Walmart and shopping at Jewel and shopping at, the other major grocery chains are suddenly being hit by the repercussion of
Yeah,
COVID, which is
right.
this huge blast of inflation that we're seeing now. And you and I and everybody else who is involved in trying to grow the local food system across the country, you know, would try and persuade people about what we call the high cost of cheap food. You know,
Mm,
if you're eating food that is doused with chemicals, it's grown in artificial fertilizers and soils that don't have the microbial vitality that give food its nutritional value. Um, that consumer packaged goods then were oriented towards salt, sugar, and fat, as they say. The stuff that people love to eat, but that's really bad for you, which has caused this huge explosion of diet-related disease. So, the food is cheap out of your pocket today, but in terms of the future healthcare costs, the future environmental costs of environmental remediation, and all these other problems, it's enormous, and it's enormous societal burden. But the problem is that for generations and generation now, people have been programmed to shop for food on price only, and so they'd you go to the farmer's market and they say a pint of organic blueberries is $4, and say, oh, I can get that for $2 at Walmart, and they're not even thinking about the ultimate consequence, because it's a hard thing to explain, because there are multiple buckets on the high cost of cheap food, whereas all you're seeing is 3 pounds of apples for 99 cents. So what we've learned, both with the supply chain disruptions early in COVID and now with this inflationary surge, is the fragility of the conventional food system that nobody ever was confronted with before. And I mean, you have a better, finger on the pulse of product pricing. But, my experience of the farmers market so far is that prices have not increased by 10% at the farmers market. I mean, farmers are going to endure some additional costs. They have to pay for gasoline to truck their food to the farmers market or the consumers, but they're not paying. Most of the ones who farm sustainably, organic, they're not paying for these chemical inputs, and the prices for that are 2x and 3x. Some farmers are maybe challenged to survive this if these prices don't come down very soon. So yeah, so from your perspective as a marketer, what's differential?
yeah, I mean, so from February of last year to this past February, overall food's gone up about 8%. I think USDA released a report
Mhm.
in March that said it was about 7.9% overall. There's a few things why food isn't the thing on it's not the thing on the news that you see, right? Why? Because it's a lot harder in a terms of universal pricing, right? If I start talking about the price of eggs, it's very specific to the price of eggs. It doesn't have, anything to do with the other things I might be buying. But gas, right?
Right.
Everybody uses and everybody needs, and everybody sees that price on that sign. You've only got three: unleaded, regular, right? All the so so that's why food is not becoming more, I think, widely talked about in terms of how much it's actually increased. Right now, food is costing, compared to your dollar, more than it has in 40 years,
Yeah.
right? And you go back, how far is 40 years? You're talking about like Jimmy Carter and a really bad, economy, and just bad point for the United States in terms of economy. And so, yeah, I mean, when you go into the grocery store now, everything has gone up well over, in terms of price point, well over 40%.
Right.
So it's incremental. I think overall they're projecting that this year it will go up an additional 5.5%,
Mhm.
which means from a year ago it'll be somewhere around 13 or 14% increase in food. What that translates to in terms of, like, let's say, a beef brisket that you might have bought in one of Ahold Delhaize's Stop and Shops or variety of grocery stores, or a Kroger. What that translates to is probably between 5 and 6 times the cost on your corned beef brisket this year.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's what that translates to. And this is a reason why it is a great point about why a localized food system is vital, both economically and substantiatively, I guess. Just thinking about how we survive, but also, in an economic way, it's the fact that it provides insulation to these, many factors. One of the biggest reasons food has gone up in the last 2 months at an increased rate is because we have some of the major centers of most processed foods, being Ukraine and that whole region, under siege, right? And so you've got all kinds of problems that are occurring that haven't even hit our actual supply.
Right. There's
So
still the
that's the thing,
pipeline.
I think, that, yeah, right. Everything during the pandemic, if you really, zoom in on it, it is a indication, that, number one, you're not going to see it immediately. Number two, once it happens, it's not going to recover quickly. And number three, price is out the window, right? When you can't get something, what are you willing to pay for it if you can get it, right?
Mhm.
What are you willing to pay for eggs when your family has no eggs? I think you're absolutely right. And we saw over the years prior to the pandemic that being the sticking point that we would hear. It wasn't about, oh my, how fresh or healthy or nutritionally dense the fresh eggs were. It was about how, well, I can get 18 eggs at Walmart for $1.99,
Right.
and I've got a farmer who's, producing organic fresh eggs for me that costs $7.
Right.
Why do I do that?
Mhm.
What, like, and I think that, it is a good indication of, how we have come to really expect our food supply to behave, and what we value food on, and
Right.
it really is true. It's convenience and it's price, and that's it. It wasn't how many, like, look at all the stuff. I mean, if it was anything else, we wouldn't have, half of the ingredients in our food that we have. The packages wouldn't have the ingredients in them that they actually have if we were actually looking at it.
Yeah. And I said over the years, because I've been involved in these arguments for a long time, you know, um, people value more what they put on their bodies and what they put their bodies into than they do what they're putting into their bodies. And I used to say, you know, for people who have true food insecurity, that we set them aside because they're guiltless. But for people of means who still refuse to eat a better diet and support a local food system, I said, don't talk to me about your closet full of $300 pair of shoes or your big house or your luxury SUV, and then tell me that a pint of $5 organic blueberries is too expensive.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
a matter of priorities.
it is. It is a matter of priorities. Probably the best story that I have is what I was just talking about, the price of eggs. And this woman had compared, said, the price, I think it was $5 difference, and she
Mhm.
could get more eggs at Walmart. And the farmer's trying to explain why their eggs are more fresh and healthier for her, and how old the eggs in the grocery store. Most people don't know, but the average egg you buy at the grocery store, somewhere between 60 and 90 days old. Like,
Mhm.
fact,
Yeah.
fact, right? But this woman was holding it was a large latte from Starbucks. And I said, what's interesting about that is the difference in price isn't even as much as you paid for that latte. And
Yeah.
she just looked at me, and she put it down, and she handed the farmer the money and took the eggs. And I thought that, man, isn't that just a great, like, image of where we're at as
Yeah.
people. And I knew, I don't blame or shame people for that. I think it's just putting it in perspective in a way of like, hey, wake up, you're spending $300 on a wallet or something. You can't spend 30 bucks on a grass-fed steak. Like, crazy,
Yeah,
crazy.
it is totally. And you also see these people, their hair is on fire about the increased cost of gasoline, which of course is a burden, but then they'll drive their car with the expensive gas to like a Starbucks and get a Frappuccino, which is like $60 a gallon. So yeah, people just need to kind of, you know,
We all do. I mean, we all do. I
balance
say
this.
that, like, I'm constantly trying to, make sure I'm looking at things through the perspective of, like, reality, rather than, just, I think, life is a busy thing, and there's a lot going on for a lot of people. And, food is one of those things that's become it's like, I remember when we first met, I said, it's a pretty similar concept to, asking, people how much they know about their food when you ask them what brand mattress they sleep on every
Right.
night, right? Like, most people don't know. They can't remember, or
Yep.
what model is your mattress that you sleep on, unless you bought it very recently. You don't have a clue, but you sleep on it every day. We eat food constantly. If you're my 8-year-old, you're literally eating it all day. And, she's I've raised her to be conscious about what's in her food. And I think that's all that really, we gotta do here is try
Mhm.
to try to work on ways that people will say, you know, I'm really, in terms of wearing something or driving something, like, food is probably one of the most intimate things you can
Yeah.
do or buy, because it goes in you.
Yeah.
And, it's like, how are we not paying more attention to that? And I think it's something that is the necessary wake up call for most people. It's saying, before you put that in your body, why don't you read what's in it? Or, you know, why don't you really consider what's the best version of that to
Mhm.
put in your body? If you're going to eat an egg, like, why eat an egg that has almost no nutrients left in it?
Right.
Joking around, but also very seriously, getting feedback from a customer who's telling us our eggs are bad because the yolks are orange, and, having to explain to them that, hey, listen, I hate to break it to you, but, a yellow oak, a yellow yolk is not a good thing.
No.
Most, if a chicken is healthy and it's a fresh egg, it's going to be an orangey or amber or red kind of color.
Yeah.
Why? Because those nutrients are still present, and over time they'll degrade. You know, how people would know that, I guess I don't blame them. I don't know
Mhm.
how you would know that unless you tried to,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
you
more,
know?
more food education earlier. It would be good, and we'll get to that because I have a lot of friends who work in that area, and we are going to try and bring some guests in to future episodes. But let's wrap now before because the two of us can go on for a long time.